Welcome to Khel Radio. I'm your host Riya, and joining me today is Mr. Raunak Satpathy. He has over 10 years of experience in criminal, corporate, and other matters before various district courts, high courts, and the Supreme Court. He's worked on various matters involving the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012, that is the POCSO Act, and he's joining us today to help us understand the legal and procedural intricacies involved in the allegations leveled against the Wrestling Federation of India's president, Brij Bhushan Singh. So, there's thank you so much for joining us today. There's a lot that we would like to talk to you about. And there's a lot that needs to be understood in order to bust the myths and the misinformation that's going around regarding the application of the law. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on board, Riya. I'm really glad.
We'd like to jump right in. First, to give a little bit of context, also, although there is a lot of discussion about the controversy between the Indian wrestlers and the WFI President Brij Bhushan Singh's allegations that have been leveled against him. Here's a little bit of context what has actually happened so far. Back in January of 2023, the Indian wrestlers sat on protest near the Jantar Mantar seeking action against the WFI President Brij Bhushan Singh and certain coaches of the WFI against whom certain allegations of sexual assault against female wrestlers have been brought about. And they thought that certain action has to be taken against these people, right? They are in positions of power and they interact with a lot of young people. So they sat on protest seeking such action. However, nothing much has happened since. The months that followed saw a lot of deliberations between the wrestlers and the sports ministry. There were attempts to form a neutral oversight committee. However, no FIR was filed for a very long time. Ultimately, after the intervention of the Supreme Court, two FIRs were filed against the accused. The first was under the Indian Penal Code for allegations of sexual offences against adult wrestlers, and the second, the one we'll be focusing on, was filed under the POCSO Act by a minor wrestler. So, to kick off our conversation, I think the first thing to do is to understand the context in which the POCSO Act was brought about and the what was the intention of the legislature in introducing this special piece of legislation.
You have touched a very broad canvas for which even I'll have to, answer back in a broad canvas. Now, the requirement for POCSO becomes multifold in a country like ours, which is still where the mentality, the civilization is still in a developing stage. United Nations in 1989 clarified that we need to have a separate law dealing with the rights of children and passed the Convention on Rights of Child. The
Right.
convention was supposed to be adopted within a couple of years by all the member states, but unfortunately, like the timelines fall a bit late in our country, we woke up from the slumber somewhere in 2012 with this special legislation.
Right.
Goa thankfully had a law before this, which was the Goa Child Rights and Rules, which was passed in 2004. And the very intent per se, or the human index behind getting such a law was that the general criminal systems have anyways been botched as on date. The
Right.
offenders are totally abreast. They are in fact more abreast than the victims for sure. Because the
Right.
victims unfortunately deal with the fate of luck, whereas the offenders come with a premeditated mindset to commit those offenses. So they have played around with the criminal system and they know their ways out, the lacunas in and out. This
Right.
act was meant to address that one specific intent, that any kind of sexual related harassment of children cannot be dealt with lightly. There were time bound procedures which were brought into place. There were certain presumptions in law which were brought into place. Like you understand that every crime has two elements. There has to be a mental element and an actual element in terms of action.
Right.
So I, being a child, might not be in a position to prove that somebody had the mental element to come and commit that offense on me. So this
Right.
act presumes that a moment a report of such offense is being made, the person who is the perpetrator of the offense had an inbred mental element of committing that act. So that is where this act came into place. This was meant to address, like how you said, no water has moved since January. There was point of a committee. Now, the government and the ministry didn't do God's job by forming this committee. They were duty bound to do it.
Right.
They delayed the formulation of the committee. They dragged their feet for months is something beyond comprehension for any regular legal advocate like me who deals in matters relating to POSCO. There have been numerous instances across the demographics of this country, not just Delhi. Delhi police, as you know, is one of the fastest acting polices. They will arrest you before you have
Yeah.
dropped a tweet. They will arrest you even before the commission of offences happened. They will arrest you before you plan to make a press announcement with regard to bringing out certain irregularities in government. But for some reason, in such a heinous offence, with respect to a person who has had 38 FIRs in the past with him, they have not taken any step. So those dark spots still remain as to why this has happened. But thankfully, the force of law is there. There was certain intervention, if not direct, indirect, by the judges, which
Yeah.
made them take this step. And we are
Right.
where we are today. The FIRs have come into being. As we are being told, the statements are being recorded simultaneously. All the statements are being recorded. So
Right.
there's a lot of hula loop. Let's see where it
Yeah.
finally goes on to. But as a lawyer, yeah, it's very striking as to how this much time has been given, how so much planes was given to this person. We are
Right.
all as perplexed as you.
Absolutely. In fact, I feel like the events that have occurred in the past few months are all the more evidence to the fact that a law like POCSO is so important in our country. Because in the absence of that, things would be so much worse, right? So, like, it points to the importance of this piece of law. So now to follow up on just that, in this case, there has been, like you said, a lot of hullabaloo about the procedural aspect of things as well. So the wrestlers' protest is talking about how the correct procedure was not followed, whereas the other side of people are talking about how there is more to it and how the procedure is not was not strictly ignored either. So I think it becomes very important to understand what really happened and what really needs to happen in these cases, right? What is the procedure that has been laid down by the law, and what do the precedents talk about? What should be done in such cases, specifically like under POCSO, but specifically in cases of aggravated sexual assault, right? With under POCSO, which a little bit of context here is that the FIR that was filed under POCSO was regarding aggravated sexual assault, which has been defined under Section 9 of the Act. So, what would be the right course of action for law enforcing authorities to take in such cases?
See, the procedure of our country is thankfully pretty simplified. And we have a very well pronounced legal maxim which goes around that procedure is a handmaid of justice. Procedures
Right,
are not made to derail from the way of justice, but to achieve it as an eventuality. The procedures are quite straightforward and simple. I'll be candid and not go around words describing it. Here, the
right,
intimation, as you have started in the very prelude, came back in January.
right,
Today, we are in June. There was a PIL which has to be filed. It took 6 months for them to act on that intimation and file an FIR. So
right,
that is where they have already derailed the procedure on the very first go.
right,
Now, after registration of an FIR, the determining authority is that if it is a heinous offense, if it is a grave offense, you are bound to arrest the person. That is the norm.
right,
Across my 14 years of practice, I have never seen the police not arrest a person when there has been allegation of an offense which entails a
right,
statement of more than 5 years.
right.
But what they have done today is they have said that we are in the process of conducting our inquiry and investigation. If
Yes,
your inquiry did not result or did not find out sufficient material to make this person culpable, you should have had the gall to go to the Supreme Court and said, sorry, we are not registering an FIR.
right,
Initially, to cover up your inaction, your lackadaisical attitude, what you do is you go and say that, okay, I am registering an FIR. That means there was material which came out in the inquiry.
right,
Clearly states that you had ample material which came out in the inquiry. Now, after the inquiry, when a statement is recorded from the minor girls itself, and mind you, this is not one girl, there are 12 people who've come and made allegations which are very
right.
serious in nature. You could have
Ab-
doubted the credibility of one person, two persons, they could have had political motives, but these are 12 qualified athletes who have come out. The period of
Right,
allegations is spread over 10 years. You are bound to arrest that person. The
absolutely.
only one, the only one litmus which could have determined is if he was in the same room, in the same location where these people have kind of alleged offenses have to be committed. That is
Mm.
enough for the investigating officer to arrest him. Then
Right.
it is the court's prerogative to go and see if the material is enough to keep him in custody, to leave him on bail. That is all upon the court. That
Right.
is where people like me come into the picture. Before this, it is not the investigating officer's job to go and see as to whether those evidences are sufficient or not to arrest him or not. He was duty bound to arrest him. Arrest is the norm.
Exactly.
I'll
Right.
tell you a very simple instance. I had a case relating to a well renowned person in a very decorated locality in Delhi. They had a family dispute from before. They were living in the same house. It was a joint family. They had a family dispute between the brothers. The daughter made an allegation that her uncle, that is her chacha, held her hand while coming down from the stairs.
Right.
That person was arrested within 45 minutes of the reporting of this incident. Within 2 hours, we procured the CCTV footage. We saw that it is the other way around.
Okay.
The person did not hold the daughter's hand. The daughter held his hand. She's like, आज मैं तेरे को सिखाती हूँ कि तूने मेरे पापा के
Right.
साथ क्या किया, मैं तेरे साथ क्या कर सकती हूँ. There was a video recording of it. The magistrate denied me bail. She said, these are not questions we can go into now. It's an offense under POSCO. The girl has given a statement. We are sorry. That person
Right.
had to be in custody for 11 days. On the 11th day, we were able to get a bail from High Court. The magistrate, the Sessions Court, both of them denied the bail, saying it's such a serious
Right.
offense, the statement of the girl is enough. And today I have three statements of the girl. I have a
Yeah.
164 statement. Unfortunately, nothing has moved. So the procedure has been given a
Yeah.
bypass. The intent of the legislation have been given a bypass for reasons which are best known to the investigating officer. He was to be arrested by now. The girl was to be confronted with him. Evidence was to be collected. But nothing has happened.
Right. Yeah, in fact, like you mentioned, there are 12 instances, and these instances have now also come out in the media, right? Like there is, you can go up and read what has happened, and it's really concerning that someone who has so many allegations against him, and this is an institution where children are always going to be entering, right? So this becomes a systemic thing, and that's a real problem. So it's very
See,
hard to understand.
the very point of bringing this legislation was to make it mandatory for
Right,
reporting and acting on crimes of this nature.
right,
Institutions
exactly,
where this kind of a crime happens, even if the victim does not complain about it, and
right,
somehow the people in charge of the institutions, like here, there are certain instances where he was abusing and molesting them inside certain sports premises.
right,
So the
yes,
managers of that sports premises were reported about this by the
right,
parents of the victim. He was duty bound to come and report to the police under Section 31 of the Act. Any
right,
person who comes to knowledge of such an offense was supposed to come and report. But nobody reported. So the
exactly. And
procedures have been drawn to the bottom here.
yeah. And I think that's very concerning. Like not only before, but also now there's still so much sort of discrepancy in how things are being carried out. It becomes a real concern because the person is still at large, right? And clearly there's, some sort of intimidation towards the witnesses, towards the people who have finally spoken up. And that's obviously a big concern. And this is something arrest would also help curb. But yeah, unfortunately, there has been no
That is the
action in it.
purpose of arrest. You procure the
Right,
evidence, you secure the witness, you ensure that there is no form of an intimidation. And even in bail, these are the conditions. If he's arrested and
exactly.
he's put on bail, these are the conditions that are supposed to be put on him. But today
Right,
he's scot free because of the
exactly.
patronage he enjoys, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. So, another thing since we are on procedural issues, another thing that usually comes up in such cases that I think is important to address is the accused often tries to prove that the victim was not a minor at the time of commission of the crime, right? This is something that happens in a lot of cases. A lot of famous cases I've also seen this, that they really attempt to try and prove that the victim was not a minor at the time of the crime. And in some instances, this is in fact true that this was true and the victim was not a minor. However, that does not do away with the fact that the crime still might have been committed. So, what is the way forward in those cases?
See, that is where the job of the courts come into play.
Right.
The court is the authority to decide whether your defenses are valid or not. I
Okay.
might
Right.
make a moonshine and say that the victim does not exist tomorrow, but
Right.
that won't make it something which comes to my defense. I'll have to go and prove it in the court.
Right.
I'll have to lead evidences. The victim will be given a right to lead evidences. The prosecution, which is supposed to be committing investigation by now, should have already led those evidences rather than these coming out by way of media. This should
Right.
have been filed in form of a charge sheet before a court in due course, like
Right.
it would have generally occurred. In my case, like I informed you, the victim's school records ossification was done at the High Court's direction within a week of filing of the FIR.
Right.
Because
Right.
even then, there is a very general defense everyone takes that she was not a minor. She had a
Yeah.
premeditated idea to implicate me, and that is why she's done it.
Right.
But
Right.
this is in the court's domain. Who are you to
Exactly.
come out in the media scot free and make these kind of claims? You go to the
Right.
court and get your case quashed if you're that assured about it. You don't
Exactly.
want to conduct investigation. You don't send that person even to come and join investigation. You have called those minor girls thrice. You have made them sit for six
Yeah.
hours. Their
Exactly.
cross-examination has happened in the police station.
Right.
Something that was supposed to happen in the court. Now these girls are supposed to be given a safe and secure environment. There are 13
Exactly.
sections of the POSCO which say how, the statement of a girl is to be recorded, how her mental counseling is to be done. The people recording her statement are not supposed to be in a formal attire in a police
Yeah.
uniform or make it sound very rigorous. But
Right.
you have already done that with her. And what was supposed to be done with the accused is being done with these victims. So
Exactly.
even if they are meant not minors, assuming for a second, the court decides and sends the matter to another appropriate court. The offense
Right.
has been committed nevertheless.
Exactly. Right. I think this conversation proves how important it is to follow due procedure, due process of law, because a neglect of the same makes the victim suffer more than the accused, right? In this situation, it's so evident. The victims are going through so much, whereas the accused is not really even there. There was no FIR against the accused for the longest time. That speaks about how important the procedure becomes. And misinformation is again a huge problem, right? Like, since this is an important case that's been talked about on the media all over, it's so important that people are also aware about how the law applies, what's the right procedure before jumping to conclusions. So, thank you so much for shedding light on the procedure that must be followed. And it's really helpful. I think awareness is the first step, and everyone should be aware of how the law works and not hide
See,
behind.
we should appreciate how this law has awakened our country. The amount of
Absolutely,
child reporting has grown fourfold. It is no
absolutely,
secret. It is no secret that we were a country of kind of a backdrop mindset where these crimes were prevalent, and there has been a deterrent. So people
absolutely,
having the audacity to come and say that we'll amend the law because today there is a case which is filed against me really speaks of the level of civilization and the level of distress we are going through.
absolutely.
The
Yes,
government should come out. There must be a bold statement saying that we are a land ruled by the rule of law, and this kind of
yes.
thing should be curtailed at the nip.
Absolutely. And I think it sends out an important message as well, right? Like, the law isn't
Yeah,
in place. A lot of progress has been made in terms of the law, right? From back in, say, early 2000s to now, we have a dedicated legislation which is supposed to enable victims or help victims out in certain circumstances like these. So the law is there, but I think enforcement becomes such an issue, which is why procedure, being aware of procedures and knowing your rights is extremely, extremely important. So thank you so much for this. And so in this episode, we talked about the procedural aspect of things, but like you mentioned, it's a very important law, and the more needs to be known about this law. So we'll carry on this conversation and talk a little bit more about the POCSO Act in the second part of this conversation. So thank you so much, and stay tuned.
really looking forward. Thank you for having me on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much.